Persia, known today as Iran, was one of the most influential and enduring civilizations in history. Long before the founding of Rome or the great European empires, Persia was already a power shaping the destiny of the ancient world. Strategically located between Europe and Asia, it became a key center of trade, knowledge, and culture. Cyrus the Great founded the Achaemenid Empire in the 6th century BC, creating a model of government based on tolerance and justice. His successor, Darius I, brought the empire to its greatest expansion, from Egypt to India, and organized an administration so advanced that it inspired later civilizations. Xerxes I, his son, led the legendary Greco-Persian wars against Greece with epic battles such as Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. Later, Alexander the Great would end Persian power with the fall of Darius III, but the spirit of Persia survived. It would be reborn under the Parthians and the Sassanids, confronting Rome in wars that defined the balance of power in the ancient world. This is the story of the Persian Empire. The origins of Persia, the birth of an empire. In the heart of the Iranian plateau, between mountains that seem to rise from fire and deserts that stretch like endless seas, one of the most powerful and enduring peoples in history was born, the Persians. Before their name became synonymous with empire and greatness, that land was a mosaic of tribes, cultures, and languages that coexisted in constant tension between survival and ambition. The roots of Persia sink deeply into the very origins of the Indo-European peoples, those who, more than 4,000 years ago, began to migrate from the steppes north of the Caspian Sea toward the fertile regions of the south and west. The Iranian plateau became a meeting point between civilizations. To the east, the peoples of Bactria and Sogdiana dominated the valleys of Central Asia. To the west, the Elamites had founded powerful kingdoms on the plains of Susa and Anshan. To the north, the Medes extended their influence over the mountains of Media. At this crossroads was born the Persian identity. Ancient Assyrian texts already mentioned, around the 9th century BC, two distinct peoples, the Mada, or Medes, and the Parsa, or Persians, who inhabited the mountainous regions of southwestern Iran. These clans, organized into pastoral and warrior communities, shared language, religion, and customs, but not a centralized power. The Medes were the first to build a recognizable political structure. At the end of the 8th century BC, under Assyrian pressure, they unified their tribes under the leadership of a legendary king, Darius. According to Herodotus, Darius was a wise judge who established justice among the tribes and built the city of Ecbatana, the future capital of Media. Although his figure moves between myth and history, he represents the birth of the first organized Iranian kingdom, a direct predecessor of the future Persian Empire. His successor, Phraortes, expanded the Median domain and fought against the Assyrians but was defeated. His son, Cyaxares, reformed the army and achieved what his father could not. Together with the Babylonians, he destroyed the Assyrian Empire in 612 BC, marking the end of one of Mesopotamia's oldest civilizations. While the Medes consolidated their power in the north, the Persians inhabited the region of Persis, modern-day Fars, in the south. They were vassals of Media, but their independence grew over time. Their first known dynasty, the Achaemenids, took its name from a nobleman named Achaemenes, considered the mythical ancestor of the Persian kings. Although little is known about him, his lineage would become the backbone of the future empire. From his descendants came Teispes, who ruled in Anshan and maintained an ambiguous relationship with the Medes, political subordination but cultural autonomy. Constant contact with the Mesopotamian peoples allowed the Persians to assimilate administrative knowledge, writing, and agricultural techniques. Elam, a civilization much older than Persia, transmitted to them the idea of sacred kingship and the use of monumental architecture as an expression of power. Thus, when Persia later expanded, it would do so not only through military strength, but also through a deep understanding of social organization and diplomacy. By the middle of the 6th century BC, the balance in the Iranian plateau began to change. Media had become a vast but weak empire, corroded by nobility and internal mistrust. On its borders, the Babylonians and Lydians watched closely. In that context, a Persian prince, descendant of Teispes, began a revolution that would change history, Cyrus II, later called the Great. But before his rise, Persia was a marginal, warlike, and austere people. The Persians were organized into clans, worshipped deities of nature, and practiced rites of fire and purity, elements that would later become the basis of Zoroastrianism. The Persian territory was harsh and demanding. The Zagros Mountains separated the fertile plains of Mesopotamia from the arid Iranian interior. Survival depended on mobility, herding, and warfare. Caravans crossed the valleys carrying metals, horses, wool, and precious stones. This constant exchange forged in the Persians a pragmatic and adaptable mindset. They knew how to negotiate, but also how to fight. That duality between diplomacy and violence would mark their future empire. Modern archaeology has revealed that long before Cyrus, there were already Persian administrative centers with advanced structures. In Anshan, inscriptions in Elamite and Akkadian show the integration of diverse cultural elements. In those tablets, the Persians appear as heirs to an ancient order, but also as a new force seeking to define its identity. The idea of an imperial destiny began to take shape there, in the valleys where the languages of merchants, soldiers, and priests mingled. When the scribes of Babylon first recorded the name of Cyrus on their tablets, they did not know that this king came from a small and rugged land, but one destined to forge the first truly global empire. Persia was born from the desert, iron and fire, but also from the ideal of order, justice, and unity that would transform ancient Asia into a single world. There, between the shadows of the Median past and the radiance of a new power, the Persian era began. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the empire. No name resonates as powerfully in the foundations of Persia as that of Cyrus II, known to the Greeks as Kyros ho Megas, Cyrus the Great. His figure emerges in a time of uncertainty and transition, when the Medes dominated the Iranian plateau but their power was beginning to crumble. The Persians, until then vassals, saw in that young prince the opportunity for radical change. Cyrus not only unified his people, he gave birth to the first truly multicultural empire in history. Cyrus was born around 600 BC in Anshan, the son of Cambyses I and a descendant of Teispes, heir to the Achaemenid dynasty. From a young age, he was trained in the discipline of combat, tribal administration, and the religious traditions that revered Ahura Mazda, the supreme god. Herodotus recounts a legendary version of his origin. The Median king Astyages, his maternal grandfather, dreamed that his daughter would give birth to a son who would overthrow him to a child destined to overthrow him. Fearing the prophecy, he ordered the newborn killed, but the child was saved and secretly raised by shepherds until fate brought him once more before his grandfather. Although the story has mythical elements, it reflects the perception of Cyrus as a chosen one, destined to found a new order. When he came of age, Cyrus inherited the small kingdom of Persia. Formerly still a vassal of Media, his ambition surpassed that of any previous Persian king. He began a process of internal unification, consolidating the support of the southern tribes and establishing a disciplined army. His charismatic leadership and reputation for justice won him loyalties even beyond his borders. In 550 BC, rebellion broke out against Astyages. The Median armies marched south, but many of their commanders, weary of the old king, defected and joined Cyrus. The decisive battle took place near Ecbatana. Astyages was defeated, captured, and pardoned. That gesture marked the beginning of a policy that would distinguish the new empire, clemency. With the fall of Media, Cyrus united Medes and Persians under one banner for the first time. Instead of destroying the conquered kingdom, he integrated it into his structure. Ecbatana became one of the imperial capitals, and many Median nobles held high administrative positions. The strategy was clear: to maintain the continuity of power and gather loyalties, not annihilate them. From that moment, the Persian Empire would expand not only by the sword, but through diplomacy and tolerance. The next target was the Kingdom of Lydia in Asia Minor, ruled by the legendary Croesus, famous for his wealth and his oracles. Lydia was a center of trade and culture where the roots of the Aegean and the East intersected. In 547 BC, Cyrus marched west with an army reinforced by Medes and Persians. Greek sources tell that Croesus, confident in his fortune, consulted the oracle of Delphi before starting the war. The oracle answered ambiguously, "If you cross the river Halys, you will destroy a great empire." Croesus interpreted the phrase in his favor. But the empire that would be destroyed was not Cyrus's, but his own. The battles were intense. Croesus used chariots and Greek mercenaries, but Cyrus employed a daring tactic: flexible formations of light infantry and mobile cavalry, ideal for the terrain of Anatolia. After the victory at Tyria, Croesus withdrew to his capital Sardis, believing the war was over. However, Cyrus immediately followed and besieged the city. According to Xenophon, he used camels to disorganize the Lydian horses, who feared their smell. Within days, Sardis fell. Croesus was captured, and once again Cyrus spared his life. The conquest of Lydia opened the doors of the Aegean to Persia. The Greek city-states of Asia Minor, such as Ephesus and Miletus, quickly submitted. Cyrus avoided imposing his religion or culture, allowing each region to maintain its customs in exchange for tribute and loyalty. Thus was born the most efficient imperial model of antiquity, one based on controlled diversity. While the West was secured, Cyrus turned his gaze eastward. His armies advanced as far as Bactria and the Indus region, subduing nomadic peoples and establishing permanent garrisons. Persian expansion transformed Central Asia into a corridor of economic and cultural exchange. But the most momentous event of his reign was yet to come: the conquest of Babylon. In 539 BC, Cyrus faced the last great Mesopotamian power. Babylon, ruled by Nabonidus, was in internal crisis. His religious policies had alienated the clergy and the people. The Babylonians saw in Cyrus not an enemy, but a liberator. The Persian army advanced along the Euphrates River and, according to chronicles, diverted its course to cross the walls. The city fell without a major battle. Nabonidus was captured, and Cyrus entered Babylon in triumph amid acclamations. From that event arose one of the most remarkable documents in history: the Cyrus Cylinder, an Akkadian inscription considered by many to be the first declaration of human rights. In it, the king proclaimed that he had allowed exiled peoples to return to their lands and restore their temples. Among them were the Jews, captives since the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. Cyrus allowed them to return and rebuild their temple, earning a reputation for justice that endured for centuries. Unlike previous conquerors, Cyrus did not impose his language or his religion. He ruled as a sovereign who respected the traditions of his subjects, creating a system of power both flexible and firm. His official title was King of the Four Corners of the World, a formula inherited from Mesopotamia but filled with new meaning. He did not merely conquer lands, he united peoples under a common order. Toward the end of his life, Cyrus undertook campaigns in the northeast against the Massagetæ tribes, a nomadic people beyond the Seir Daria. It was there, according to legend, that he met his death. Herodotus recounts that he fell in battle against Queen Tomyris, who, after defeating him, plunged his head into a wineskin full of blood as vengeance for her slain son. Though the tale is more myth than history, Cyrus's tomb at Pasargadae, a simple white stone structure without ornamentation, reflects his sober and transcendent character. Under his rule, Persia transformed from a tribal confederation into an empire spanning 3 continents. His legacy was founded not on destruction but on organization and respect for diversity. With his death around 530 BC, the ancient world was changed forever. On the plateau of Pasargadae, where the wind still blows among the ruins, remains the echo of his unwritten epitaph: "O man, whoever you are and come to contemplate my tomb, know that I, Cyrus, founded the Persian Empire and ruled over all mankind." The government of Darius I, organization, power, and expansion. After the death of Cyrus the Great, the vast empire he had created needed more than just an heir. It required an administrator capable of maintaining its structure, consolidating it, and giving it continuity. That role was fulfilled by Darius I, known as Darius the Great, who transformed Cyrus's work into a political, economic, and military system so efficient that it would serve as a model for later empires for centuries. Darius's rise was not peaceful. After the death of Cambyses II, Cyrus's son, Persia went through a crisis of legitimacy. Cambyses, who had conquered Egypt, died during his return to the empire, and a man who called himself Smerdis, possibly an impostor according to official sources, usurped the throne. Darius, then a young nobleman and commander of the royal guard, rebelled along with 6 Persian nobles, overthrew the usurper and proclaimed himself king in 522 BC. This episode, immortalized in the Behistun inscription, was more than a coup d'état. It marked the beginning of a new administrative era and the consolidation of the absolute power of the Persian monarch. The Behistun inscription, carved into a monumental rock high on a mountain, was written in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, and recounts how Darius restored order after suppressing rebellions in nearly all provinces of the empire. It is one of the most important documents of the ancient world, comparable to the Rosetta Stone, and served as the key to deciphering cuneiform writing centuries later. In it, Darius presents himself as chosen by Ahura Mazda, the god of light and truth, and describes his enemies as liars and traitors. Through this narrative, he legitimized his reign and linked his authority to divinity, cementing the sacred character of the Persian monarchy. Once the throne was secured, Darius reorganized the empire with almost mathematical precision. He divided the territory into satrapies, or administrative provinces, each governed by a satrap, generally a Persian or Median noble, responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and overseeing local justice. Although these governors enjoyed a certain degree of autonomy, Darius created a centralized control system to prevent abuses, the eyes and ears of the king, a network of imperial inspectors who traveled through the provinces, reported directly to the monarch, and ensured the loyalty of his officials. This structure allowed efficient administration of an empire that extended from the Indus to the Nile, encompassing Egypt, Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, the Caucasus, and part of the Balkans. No previous kingdom had reached such size or diversity. At its greatest extent, the Persian Empire controlled about 8 million square kilometers and nearly 40% of the world's population of its time. Darius also reformed the economy. He introduced a common currency, the daric, a highly pure gold coin that became a symbol of stability and prosperity. Thanks to it, trade flourished throughout the territory. He established uniform tariffs, weights, and measures, and developed a network of imperial roads connecting the main cities. The most famous was the Royal Road, linking Susa with Sardis, over 2,500 kilometers apart. Mounted couriers, relaying every few kilometers, could travel it in just a week. Herodotus wrote in admiration, "Nothing in the world travels faster than the king's couriers." Darius's political control was also supported by a powerful bureaucracy. In his palaces of Susa and Persepolis worked scribes, translators, accountants, and envoys from all regions of the empire. Official languages such as Persian, Elamite, Aramaic, and Akkadian coexisted in state documents, reflecting the inclusive and multicultural nature of the Achaemenid government. This system allowed for efficient administration but also reinforced the idea of a universal order under the authority of the King of Kings. Darius's religious policy continued Cyrus's legacy. Although he worshipped Ahura Mazda, he showed tolerance toward all cults. Egyptian temples were restored, Babylonian priests protected, and the subjugated peoples were allowed to preserve their deities and customs. Zoroastrianism, however, began to acquire a more defined role within the state apparatus, promoting the values of truth, justice, and obedience to the monarch as a reflection of divine harmony. In the military sphere, Darius expanded and professionalized the imperial army. He created permanent corps of infantry and cavalry, integrating contingents from all regions. Among them stood out the Immortals, an elite guard of 10,000 men whose number remained constant. Whenever one died or was wounded, another immediately replaced him. Their weaponry, discipline, and impeccable appearance became the emblem of Persian power. Darius's ambition took him beyond consolidation. He undertook great campaigns to expand the borders. He conquered Thrace and Macedonia, extending Persian influence to the edge of Europe. In the east, he subdued regions of India and Central Asia, and in the west, he reinforced control over Asia Minor. However, his attempts to dominate Greece marked the beginning of a conflict that would transcend the military to become a clash of civilizations. In 499 BCEE, the Ionian cities of Asia Minor, influenced by Athens, rebelled against Persian rule. The Ionian revolt was crushed, but it ignited in Darius the desire to punish the Greeks. In 490 BCE, he launched the first Persian invasion of Greece. His fleet landed on the plain of Marathon, northeast of Athens. There, Athenian hoplites led by Miltiades faced the Persian army in a decisive battle. Against all odds, the Greeks won. The defeat did not weaken the empire, but it wounded the pride of the King of Kings. Darius swore revenge, but death reached him before he could fulfill his promise. His reign, however, left a monumental legacy. Under his authority, the Persian Empire reached its highest level of organization, stability, and splendor. He was the architect of the imperial model that would inspire the Seleucids, Parthians, Sassanids, and even the Romans themselves. Upon his death in 486 BCE, the throne passed to his son Xerxes I, heir to a vast, efficient, and proud empire, but also to an unfulfilled ambition, the conquest of Greece. On the hills of Persepolis, among the reliefs that still show the king holding the bow and the spear, the figure of Darius continues to represent the Persian ideal of order and power, the highest point of a civilization that believed it mirrored on earth the perfection of the cosmos. The religion of the empire, Zoroaster and Zoroastrianism. At the spiritual center of the Persian Empire rose a faith that not only shaped its identity, but also its notion of justice, power, and morality. Zoroastrianism. More than a religion, it was a worldview that permeated the politics and daily life of millions of subjects, giving ideological coherence to a territory as vast and diverse as that ruled by the Achaemenids. The origin of Zoroastrianism dates back several centuries before Cyrus and Darius at some indeterminate point between 1200 and 1000 BC, when a prophet named Zarathustra, or Zoroaster according to Greek tradition, began preaching a new form of faith on the plains of northeastern Iran. His teachings, collected in the Gathas, the central part of the Avesta, proposed a radical change compared to the polytheistic religions of his time. Instead of a chaotic pantheon of gods, Zoroaster proclaimed the existence of a single supreme principle, Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, creator of all that is good, true, and just. The world, according to his doctrine, was a battlefield between two eternal and opposing forces, truth or Asha and falsehood or Druj. Ahura Mazda represented light, order, and justice, while Ahriman or Angra Mainyu embodied darkness, corruption, and deceit. This duality was not a balance but a moral war in which every human being had to participate through their thoughts, words, and actions. Doing good, speaking the truth, and maintaining purity were not isolated religious acts but cosmic duties. Zoroaster taught that free will was man's greatest gift, and that each individual had the responsibility to choose good and contribute to the final triumph of Ahura Mazda. That idea, of a universe governed by universal moral laws, would become one of the philosophical pillars of Persian thought and later profoundly influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The notions of the final judgment, heaven and hell, and the redeeming Messiah have their roots, in large part, in ancient Zoroastrian visions. During the reign of Cyrus the Great, Zoroastrianism was not yet a formally organized state religion, but its spirit permeated political decisions. Religious tolerance, compassion toward conquered peoples, and the idea of ruling with justice reflected Zoroastrian ethics. Cyrus did not impose his faith, but ruled according to its principles: respect for truth, protection of the weak, and rejection of tyranny. With Darius I, the relationship between religion and power became more explicit. In the Behistun inscription, Darius constantly invokes Ahura Mazda as the source of his legitimacy. "By the grace of Ahura Mazda, I am king. Ahura Mazda granted me this kingdom." This phrase was not merely devotional but political. The king's authority emanated from the cosmic order, and governing in harmony with divine truth was his sacred duty. To lie or rebel against the king was, therefore, to challenge the universal order. Zoroastrianism was not a religion of temples or bloody sacrifices. Its spiritual center was the sacred fire, symbol of purity and divine wisdom. Zoroastrian temples, called Atashkada, were places where the fire was kept perpetually burning, tended by priests who recited prayers in Avestan and performed purification rituals. The natural elements, fire, water, earth, and air, were considered sacred, and polluting them was a grave offense. Even funeral rituals reflected this respect. Bodies were neither buried nor burned, but placed in towers of silence, or dakmas, where they were exposed to the sun and birds, thus avoiding the profanation of the elements. Zoroastrian morality was based on a simple yet profound triad: good thoughts, good words, good deeds. In this formula was summarized the entire duty of man toward the cosmos. There was no tyrannical priesthood nor a closed hierarchy. The emphasis was on personal ethical conduct. Every citizen, every soldier, every judge, and every king had to reflect that inner harmony. Hence, the Persian administration, even in its pragmatism, tended toward justice, efficiency, and respect for diversity. The concept of Asher, truth and universal order, was also a political tool. In an empire encompassing peoples with different languages, gods, and customs, the notion of a single moral order upheld by the king as the representative of divine truth offered cohesion. Zoroastrianism did not seek to eliminate local cults, but to harmonize them under a higher framework, the universal struggle between good and evil. Imperial Persian architecture reflected these principles. In the reliefs of Persepolis, for example, the peoples of the empire are depicted with dignity, bringing offerings to the king not as slaves, but as participants in the same cosmic order. The monarch is not presented as a god, but as his highest servant. This idea of sacred and ethical kingship would be the foundation of the empire's stability for generations. During the reign of Xerxes I, the Zoroastrian faith expanded even further, although it also began to show tensions with other cults. The Magi priests, guardians of the sacred fire and rituals, acquired considerable influence, and Zoroastrianism began to institutionalize, separating itself from its original spirit of individual purity. Nevertheless, its symbolic power remained intact. It was light against darkness, justice against falsehood, order against chaos. The Persian Wars, the clash with Greece. The confrontation between Persia and Greece was more than a series of battles. It was the meeting of two worldviews. On one side stood the universal order of the King of Kings, embodied in Darius I, symbol of civilization, divine authority, and the expansion of the most vast empire that had ever existed. On the other side, a collection of small, independent poleis, proud of their freedom and civic identity, ready to resist what they considered a foreign tyranny. This clash, known to history as the Greco-Persian Wars, would begin on the coasts of the Aegean with a fire that would ignite the entire Mediterranean. In 499 BC, the Greek cities of Ionia, located on the western coast of Asia Minor and under Persian rule since the conquests of Cyrus, rebelled against their satraps. They were prosperous, cultured, and deeply influenced by Athenian democracy and found intolerable the imposition of governors sent from Susa. The uprising, led by Aristagoras of Miletus, began with a daring offensive. The Ionian Greeks, supported by Athens and Eretria, attacked and set fire to Sardis, one of the empire's administrative capitals. Although the city was quickly retaken by the Persians, the act carried immense symbolic weight. When Darius received the news, Herodotus tells us, he took a bow, shot an arrow into the sky, and swore vengeance on the Athenians. He ordered a servant to repeat to him 3 times at every meal, "Master, remember the Athenians." The Ionian revolt was crushed in 494 BC after the bloody naval battle of Lerd, in which the Persian fleet destroyed the Greek resistance. Miletus was sacked, its population deported, and its temples destroyed. But the punishment did not quench Darius's anger. The true target would be Athens, the city that had ignited the spark. In 492 BC, Darius sent a first expedition under the command of Mardonius, his son-in-law. The fleet advanced through Thrace and Macedonia, subduing regions without much resistance, but a storm off Mount Athos destroyed much of the fleet and forced a retreat. 2 years later, the monarch organized a new campaign. Before beginning the invasion, he demanded from the Greek cities earth and water, symbols of submission. Many accepted, but Athens and Sparta responded by executing the Persian envoys, throwing them into wells and telling them they could find the earth and water you seek there. The gesture marked the point of no return. In the summer of 490 BC, a powerful Persian fleet led by Datis and Artaphernes crossed the Aegean Sea and landed on the plain of Marathon, about 40 kilometers from Athens. The Persian army consisted of tens of thousands of men, archers, horsemen, and light infantry from across the empire. Opposing them were barely 10,000 Athenian hoplites and a small contingent from Plataea, commanded by Miltiades, prepared to defend their land. For several days, the two armies watched each other from a distance. The Persians hoped to divide the Greeks through diplomacy or fear, while the Athenians awaited the perfect moment to strike. Finally, Miltiades ordered the advance. The hoplite charge, executed in tight formation and with unusual speed, took the Persians by surprise. Their lines broke under the assault of Greek shields and spears. In just a few hours, the battle was decided, the Persian army was defeated, and the survivors fled to their ships. According to chronicles, about 6,400 Persians died compared to only 192 Athenians. The victory at Marathon was more than a military triumph. It was a moral blow against the greatest empire in the world. Athens had proven that a free city could stand up to and defeat a universal power. The news spread throughout Greece like a revelation. Herodotus tells that after the battle, a messenger named Phidippides ran from Marathon to Athens, about 40 kilometers, to announce the victory, and after uttering the words, "We have won," fell dead from exhaustion. That episode, legendary or not, symbolized the Greek spirit, total devotion to freedom and to the polis. Darius did not accept the outcome. He immediately began preparing a new invasion, this time much larger, with the goal not only of punishing but of conquering all of Greece. But before carrying it out, a revolt in Egypt forced him to divert his forces. The monarch died in 486 BC, leaving the task unfinished to his son, Xerxes I. The echo of Marathon, however, transformed the perception of the ancient world. In the courts of the empire, the name of Athens began to be spoken with both respect and suspicion. In Greece, the victory reinforced confidence in freedom and in the power of the citizen, but it also planted a certainty: Persia would return. And when it did, it would come with all its fury, under a new king who would swear to erase Greece from the map. The clash of Marathon did not end a war, it began one. In the halls of Susa, Xerxes inherited the throne and his father's unfinished promise. When Darius I died in 486 BC, the throne of the Persian Empire passed to his son Xerxes I, a monarch of proud temperament and boundless ambition. He inherited the largest and most organized kingdom in the world, but also the wounded pride of his father after the defeat at Marathon. From his ascent, Xerxes conceived the idea of total revenge. It was not enough to subdue Athens. He had to erase Greek insolence from the face of the earth. What followed was the greatest military expedition the ancient world had ever known, a demonstration of power without precedent, but also the beginning of the decline of Persian might. For years, Xerxes prepared the invasion. He ordered troops to be gathered from across the empire: Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Phoenicians, Lydians, Scythians, Bactrians, Indians, and Persians. It is estimated that his army exceeded 500,000 men, though the Greeks, in their astonishment, spoke of more than 2 million. His fleet, composed of over 1,000 ships, was built by the best Phoenician and Ionian carpenters. In the mountains of Anatolia, the roads were widened to allow the passage of thousands of carts, provisions, and pack animals. The first confrontation took place in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a narrow gorge between the mountain and the sea that the Greeks chose to halt the enemy's advance. There, in the summer of 480 BC, Leonidas marched with 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies, determined to resist until the end. The account of this battle changed the perspective of military strategy forever, and to this day it is considered one of the bravest acts of resistance ever recorded by humanity. And, although it has been told 1,000 times, it is very interesting to experience it from the Persian perspective. From the vast court of Susa, where the walls gleamed with glazed tiles and the scribes recorded the tributes of the world, Xerxes' order had been clear: Greece must submit, and with it the insolence of those peoples who had dared to defy Darius, his father. For the Persians, the campaign against Greece was not a war of conquest, but a restoration of order. In the mind of the King of Kings, the universe had to reflect the harmony of Ahura Mazda, and any people who rejected his authority represented chaos. When the imperial army departed from Sardis toward the north, it was more than a military force. It was a manifestation of the cosmos. Dozens of nations marched under the banners of the Lion and the Sun: Medes, Elamites, Egyptians, Indians, Babylonians, Phoenicians, Scythians, Bactrians, Sogdians, and Persians. The variety of languages blended with the clamor of armor. Persian chroniclers described that march as a divine procession. Xerxes himself, covered with his scarlet robe and golden diadem, observed from a golden chariot surrounded by the immortals, his personal guard. The crossing into Europe was an engineering feat. 2 pontoon bridges linked Asia with the western continent over the Hellespont, and a newly carved road allowed uninterrupted advance. When the first troops crossed into Thrace, Persian heralds proclaimed that land and sea belonged to the king. That was the Persian vision of the world. Order emanated from the court, and all peoples of the earth had to be part of it. The Greeks, on the other hand, were seen as disobedient peoples, small, undisciplined kingdoms incapable of understanding the principle of universal unity. Their independence to the Persians was not a virtue but arrogance. However, Xerxes did not underestimate their courage. He had heard the stories of Marathon and knew the obstinacy of the Athenians. Thus, he advanced patiently, knowing that each conquered city had to be integrated, not destroyed. The army advanced through Macedonia and Thessaly without resistance. Cities sent tributes and offered provisions. But in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a gorge between Mount Oeta and the sea, the king received news that a group of Greeks had entrenched themselves to block his way. They were no more than a few thousand, led by a certain Leonidas, king of Sparta. The Median generals advised waiting, surrounding the mountains, or finding another route. But Xerxes, aware of the eyes of the whole empire upon him, decided to give a lesson in strength. For 4 days, he sent envoys offering peace. He promised riches and glory if they abandoned the pass and submitted. Leonidas replied with a phrase that Persian interpreters took time to translate: "Come and take it." That insolence would be remembered in imperial chronicles as the moment when the king's compassion ran out. On the 5th day, the attack began. Xerxes ordered the Median and Cimmerian troops to advance. The Greeks resisted. Their bronze shields and long spears formed an impenetrable wall. The Persians, accustomed to open-field combat, were repelled again and again. From his portable throne, Xerxes watched in astonishment the discipline of those men. He then sent in the immortals, the 10,000 elite warriors of the empire, dressed in light armor and carrying bows and short spears. But even they could not break the formation. The narrowness of the pass nullified the Persian numerical advantage. The Greeks fought shoulder to shoulder, and every Persian who fell was replaced by another who could barely move. The battle dragged on for 2 days under the blazing sun. The waters of the sea were stained red. The scribes accompanying the army recorded the obstinacy of the enemies with a mixture of respect and amazement. In a report found centuries later, an anonymous scribe wrote, "They are few, but they fight as if their death had meaning." Xerxes then understood that strength alone was not enough. Persian wisdom had always been that of balance. To conquer was not to destroy, but to overcome the enemy with intelligence. When a local peasant named Ephialtes revealed to the Persians a secret path that crossed the mountains, the king accepted his help. He sent General Hydarnes with a contingent of the immortals to surround the pass. It was not a betrayal for the Persians, but the fulfillment of destiny. Chaos had to be defeated by order. At dawn on the 3rd day, the Greeks realized they were surrounded. Xerxes ordered one last advance. Leonidas, instead of surrendering, sent most of his troops to safety and remained with his 300 Spartans, along with Thespians and Thebans. The final battle was brutal. The Persians fired a rain of arrows so dense that, according to Greek chronicles, it darkened the sun. The hoplites fought to the last man. When the position fell, Xerxes ordered the body of Leonidas to be recovered and buried with honor. According to Persian custom, brave enemies deserved respect. For the Greeks, Thermopylae was a heroic defeat. For the Persians, a necessary but costly victory. Xerxes had lost thousands of men for a pass that in military terms had little strategic value. But from the imperial perspective, that battle had a deeper meaning. It demonstrated that even the most rebellious peoples could be broken before the will of the king. After the victory, Xerxes ordered the pass to be cleared and a mound raised for his dead. The Greeks would be punished for their obstinacy, but also respected for their courage. The prisoners were treated with clemency, and the bodies of the fallen were buried according to their customs. The king knew the message had to be clear. Persia not only conquered, it also civilized. The army advanced southward, and Athens was abandoned by its inhabitants. The Persians burned it not out of cruelty, but as a symbolic act. The city that had humiliated Darius had to disappear from the map. From the top of the burning Acropolis, Xerxes watched the glow of the fire reflected in the sea and thought that at last order had been restored. But the winds of the Aegean, as unpredictable as history itself, would soon change. The defeat at Salamis months later would render that sacrifice useless. However, for the Persians, the memory of Thermopylae was not that of a foreign failure, but of a bitter and respectful victory, in which they understood the obstinacy of free peoples. In later inscriptions, the kings recalled that episode with solemnity. Where men rose against order, fire purified the earth, read a tablet from Susa. For Persia, Thermopylae was not just a battle. It was the affirmation of its universal mission, the reminder that even enemy courage could be part of divine balance. Xerxes advanced southward. Athens was evacuated. Its population took refuge on the island of Salamis. Shortly after, the Persian troops occupied the city and set it on fire. The Acropolis burned, and the smoke rose as a symbol of imperial dominion. But Themistocles, the Athenian strategist, was preparing the response. He knew that Greece's only hope lay at sea. With a deceptive message, he made Xerxes believe that the Greeks planned to flee from Salamis and convinced him to attack as soon as possible. The king fell into the trap. In September of 480 BC, the Persian fleet entered the strait between Salamis and Attica. The space was so narrow that their ships could not maneuver. The lighter and more agile Greek triremes attacked them in waves, sinking enemy ships one after another. Xerxes watched the battle from a hill, powerless as his naval army collapsed before his eyes. The defeat at Salamis was catastrophic. The Persian navy, backbone of the campaign, was annihilated. Without its naval support, the gigantic land army became unsustainable in enemy territory. Xerxes, fearing a counterattack, decided to retreat to Asia, leaving Mardonius with an occupation force. The following year, in 479 BC, the Greeks gathered their forces for a final offensive. On the plain of Plataea, under the command of the Spartan Pausanias, the Hellenic army defeated the Persians in a decisive battle. Almost simultaneously, the Greek fleet destroyed the last remnants of the Persian navy at Mycale, on the coast of Asia Minor. With these two victories, Greece had not only expelled the invaders, but had halted the expansion of the greatest empire in the world. For the first time in its history, Persia was forced to accept limits. The myth of absolute power was broken before the will of free and divided cities, but united by a common purpose. The consequences of the Persian Wars were profound. Militarily, Persia retained its greatness but lost its aura of invincibility. Its influence in the Aegean was reduced, and many Ionian cities took the opportunity to strengthen their autonomy. Greece, on the other hand, emerged transformed. Athens, heroine of Marathon and victor at Salamis, became the leader of the Hellenic world and founded the Delian League, a system of alliances that brought it power and wealth. For Persia, the wars with Greece marked a turning point. Although Xerxes continued to rule over an immense and still powerful territory, his moral authority was damaged. The following years would be shrouded in conspiracies, rebellions, and internal exhaustion. The dream of expansion westward vanished forever. Everyday life in the Persian Empire. Beneath the surface of the great conquests, beyond kings, armies, and the temples of fire, there existed another Persian Empire, that of everyday life. A vibrant and complex world that stretched from the sands of the Nile to the mountains of the Hindu Kush, inhabited by dozens of peoples, languages, and traditions, united under the rule of the King of Kings. Persia's strength lay not only in its army or administration, but in its astonishing ability to integrate such different cultures without erasing their identity. Unlike other ancient empires, Persia did not impose its way of life. Each region maintained its religion, laws, and customs, as long as it paid tribute and remained loyal to the monarch. That tolerance was not altruism, but strategy. In such a vast territory, uniformity was impossible. Stability depended on cooperation and respect for local traditions. Thus, the Babylonians continued to venerate Marduk, the Egyptians worshipped Amun, and the Jews rebuilt their temple in Jerusalem. In the very imperial court could coexist Zoroastrian priests, Babylonian astronomers, Greek sages, and Phoenician artisans. The empire was structured around the satrapies, provinces that combined administrative autonomy with central control. In each of them, the satrap, that is, the governor appointed by the king, resided in a local capital surrounded by officials, judges, tax collectors, and scribes. The bureaucracy was extensive and efficient. In the archives of Persepolis, thousands of tablets written in Elamite and Akkadian have been found, recording everything from payments of grain and wine to travel permits and labor compensations. Nothing escaped the eye of the state. The administrative language of the empire was Aramaic, a lingua franca that facilitated communication between such diverse regions. However, Old Persian remained the ceremonial language, reserved for royal inscriptions and the most solemn decrees. The scribes played an essential role, not only as recorders of taxes but as guarantors of legal order. The empire's economic life was a network of trade routes that connected the ends of the known world. Caravans loaded with Egyptian gold, Indian spices, lapis lazuli from Bactria, and ivory from Nubia crossed the imperial roads. Phoenician ports traded with the Mediterranean, while eastern routes connected with the civilizations of Central Asia. The royal road, which linked Susa with Sardis, was the artery of the empire. Messengers, merchants, and soldiers traveled it day and night, ensuring that information and goods flowed without interruption. The gold coins, known as darics, introduced by Darius I, facilitated trade and standardized exchanges. In the markets of Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, dozens of languages were spoken, and the products displayed the empire's diversity. Lydian textiles, Bactrian jewelry, Egyptian perfumes, Mesopotamian wheat, and horses from Nisa. It was a miniature global economy, sustained by the stability that only a strong central government could guarantee. Persian cities combined monumentality and pragmatism. In Susa, the administrative capital, the palaces were decorated with polychrome reliefs and vividly colored glazed bricks. In Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, the avenues opened onto stairways flanked by winged bulls and immense columns that supported cedarwood roofs. However, most of the population lived in agricultural villages or small towns surrounded by barley fields, vineyards, and orchards. Agriculture, the basis of imperial wealth, depended on an advanced irrigation system. The Persians built qanats, underground canals that transported water from the mountains to arid lands. These works, some still in use today, made it possible to cultivate regions that were once deserts. Persian society was hierarchically organized but allowed some degree of mobility. At the top was the king, considered a reflection of cosmic order. Around him, the nobility and high officials, many of Median origin, controlled the administration. Below them were soldiers, peasants, artisans, and merchants. Slaves existed, but their condition differed from that of other civilizations. They could own property, marry, and even obtain freedom. The army was a fundamental institution. Although military service was compulsory for Persians and Medes, soldiers came from all regions. There were Scythian spearmen, Egyptian archers, Bactrian horsemen, and Phoenician sailors. Each contingent brought its own specialties, reflecting the diversity of the empire. In campaigns, Persian logistics were astonishing. Supply wagons, mobile kitchens, and doctors accompanied the troops, ensuring their survival on long marches. In private life, Zoroastrianism permeated daily morality. Houses were simple, oriented toward the sun, and built with adobe or stone depending on the region. In noble homes, fire occupied a central place, symbolizing purity and life. Marriages were family arrangements, and polygamy, though accepted among the upper classes, was not universal. Persians valued frankness and loyalty. Lying was considered one of the worst offenses, a betrayal of the order of Ahura Mazda. Persian art combined influences. The reliefs of Persepolis show a fusion between Mesopotamian style and Anatolian delicacy. Tapestries and fabrics were famous for their quality and color. Ceramics, decorated with floral and animal motifs, were exported throughout the known world. In goldsmithing, the Persians achieved mastery that dazzled even their enemies. Cuneiform writing, although official, coexisted with simpler systems used by local merchants and scribes. In the courts, music and poetry were symbols of refinement. Musicians accompanied ceremonies, while poets sang the deeds of kings and the values of the empire. It is believed that there were oral tales about Cyrus and Darius that inspired later traditions. Daily life in the Persian Empire was a synthesis of order and diversity. A peasant in the Tigris Valley, a Phoenician merchant in Sidon, or a fire priest in Ecbatana could live under the same monarch, obey the same laws, and feel part of the same world. That was the true Persian genius, to build unity without destroying difference. While in the West the Greeks celebrated their victory, in the East millions of people continued living under Persian peace, the Pax Achaemenid. It was an empire where the roads were safe, the transactions fair, and the temples respected. Where the fire kept burning, a symbol of a civilization that, rather than conquering, had learned to organize the world. Persepolis, the heart of Persian glory. In the center of the Iranian plateau, between arid mountains and sun-drenched plains, still rises today the petrified dream of an empire, Persepolis. More than a city, it was a manifesto of power, art, and unity. There, on the monumental terrace raised upon the rock, the Achaemenid kings celebrated the dominion of peoples, the glory of Ahura Mazda, and the eternity of Persian order. The foundation of Persepolis is attributed to Darius I, around 518 BC. It was not born as a political or military capital, but as a ceremonial center meant to embody the idea of empire. Susa was the administrative seat, Ecbatana the summer residence, and Babylon the city of commerce, but Persepolis was to be the symbolic heart, the stage where the King of Kings would receive the tributes of all nations, and where the gods would be honored under the radiance of the sacred fire. The place was chosen with precision. Situated on a high plateau at the foot of Mount Ku'e-Rahmat, the Mountain of Mercy, it offered a commanding view over the valley of the Pulvar River. Darius ordered the leveling of the natural rock and the construction of an artificial platform over 450 meters long and 300 wide, supported by cyclopean walls. Upon it rose the palaces, stairways, and columns that still amaze visitors today. The local limestone, polished to brilliance, gave the whole ensemble the appearance of luminous marble reflecting the desert sun. The entrance to the terrace was through a monumental double staircase, so wide that even a procession of horsemen could ascend without difficulty. Each step was low and broad, designed so that dignitaries and ambassadors could climb with dignity. At the top stood the Gate of All Nations, built by Xerxes I, flanked by colossal winged bulls with human heads, the lamassu, symbols of power and protection. In his inscription, Xerxes declared that all peoples of the world were welcome as long as they respected the king's laws. Beyond it opened the Apadana, the great throne hall of Darius, supported by 72 columns over 20 meters high. Each was crowned with double capitals in the form of bulls, lions, or griffins, animals representing strength, vigilance, and cosmic harmony. The walls were decorated with reliefs of almost mathematical precision, processions of peoples bearing offerings to the sovereign. The detail of each figure was meticulous. The Lydians carried golden cups, the Egyptians ivory and fine cloths, the Indians horses and precious stones, the Babylonians carved vessels, the Medes weapons and ceremonial garments. They were not slaves or prisoners. All advanced in peace with dignity and respect, reflecting the Persian ideal of an empire based on cooperation rather than humiliation. The palace of Darius, or Takara, located near the Apadana, was more intimate and built in black stone, with reliefs showing the king in audiences battling mythological beasts or being blessed by Ahura Mazda. The inscriptions carved into its walls did not celebrate conquests but virtues. Darius the king, great king, king of kings, king of lands, son of Hystaspes, Persian, son of a Persian, Aryan of Aryan lineage. It was an affirmation of identity, a way of saying that Persian nobility was based not only on power, but on the purity of order and truth. The architectural complex was completed with the palace of Xerxes, the royal harem, the audience halls, the treasure warehouses, and the guard barracks. Everything was designed according to a geometric plan that combined monumentality and serenity. The decoration included brightly colored glazed bricks, carpets, draperies, and furniture made of exotic wood. The ceilings were made of cedar from Lebanon, and the doors were covered with sheets of gold and silver. Every spring during the Nowruz festival, the Persian New Year, representatives from all provinces came to Persepolis. The city became a majestic stage. Delegations climbed the stairways, musicians played solemn melodies, priests lit the sacred fire, and the king, seated on his throne, received tributes from the nations. That ceremony was not only political, but cosmic. It represented the renewal of the world order and confirmed that the King of Kings was the guardian of the balance between light and darkness. Everyday life in Persepolis revolved around that ritual splendor. Thousands of workers, artisans, and scribes lived in the city or its surroundings. The tablets found in its ruins, written in Elamite, record the payment of wages, the distribution of food, and the transport routes of materials. Men and women, free and enslaved, all received rations of grain, wine, and barley according to their rank. These documents reveal a surprisingly organized labor system, where even women could hold administrative positions or receive payments for supervising workshops. The urban design of Persepolis reflected a philosophy. The buildings were not oriented toward a temple or a central square, but toward the throne. Everything converged on the figure of the king, the representative of divine truth. Around him, art, architecture, and religion merged to express a single message: the eternity of Persian order. But the splendor of Persepolis was not immune to time or war. 200 years after its founding, in 330 BC, when Alexander the Great conquered Persia, the city was looted and burned. The flames devoured the palaces and blackened the reliefs. It is said that Alexander, drunk or driven by the desire to avenge the destruction of Athens, ordered the fire as a symbolic act of domination. The columns fell, the treasures were scattered, and the fire turned the heart of the empire into ruins. Yet Persepolis never completely disappeared. Its walls remained, and for centuries the people of the region called it Takht-e-Jamshid, the throne of Jamshid, in honor of the mythical Persian king who, according to legend, ruled in the Golden Age. In its silent stones endures the memory of an empire that believed in beauty as a reflection of power, in harmony as a sign of civilization, and in fire as a symbol of eternity. The imperial network, roads, couriers, and the king's spies. If the strength of the Persian Empire lay in its army and administration, its soul was in the roads. No other ancient power understood so clearly that ruling was not just about domination, but about connection. From the mountains of the Caucasus to the sands of Egypt, from the Indus to the Aegean Sea, a network of imperial routes wove the heart of the empire like a gigantic nervous system. Along those roads traveled soldiers, tributes, messages, wisdom, and secrets. Thanks to them, Darius could enforce his will in a matter of days, even though his empire stretched over thousands of kilometers. The backbone of that network was the Persian Royal Road. Built and expanded under Darius I around 500 BCE, it extended more than 2,500 kilometers from Susa, the administrative capital of the empire, to Sardis on the coast of the Aegean Sea. Along the way, each stretch was marked by rest stations, relay posts, warehouses, and garrisons. The royal messengers, riding selected horses and replaced at certain intervals, could traverse it in just a week, an extraordinary logistical achievement for antiquity. Herodotus summed it up in an immortal phrase: "Nothing in the world travels faster than the king's couriers." The imperial communication system was based on three principles: speed, security, and vigilance. Official messages, written on clay tablets or sealed parchments, were transported by a special class of messengers called angareon. These men enjoyed immunity and authority throughout the territory. They could requisition horses, food, or lodging wherever necessary. Each station had stables, wells, and guards, all maintained by the state. Along the route, stone columns marked distances and indicated mountain passes, while bridges and roads were paved with carved stones to withstand the constant passage of caravans and armies. The system was not only used for administration but also for trade. Thanks to the imperial routes, goods from India and Central Asia reached the cities of the Mediterranean, and Greek or Phoenician manufactures circulated to the east. In the markets of Susa and Babylon, one could find Lebanese wood, African ivory, Egyptian perfumes, and Oriental silks. The trade routes were protected by garrisons that maintained security and collected fair tributes, which promoted a prosperity unknown until then. However, beyond commercial and administrative traffic, the routes served a crucial political purpose: information. In such a vast empire, rebellions, conspiracies, and intrigues were constant threats. To anticipate them, the Persian kings developed an unprecedented intelligence network. The Greeks called it the eyes and ears of the king. They were inspectors, secret agents, and special envoys who traveled the empire unannounced, assessing the loyalty of the satraps, controlling local administration, and reporting directly to the monarch. No one escaped their surveillance. These agents had the authority to inspect palaces, judge complaints, and remove corrupt officials. Thanks to them, Darius and his successors maintained control over a territory too large to govern centrally. Their mere existence created an atmosphere of discipline and obedience. No satrap could feel completely secure in their power. Espionage was not limited to the interior of the empire. On the borders, Persian emissaries infiltrated neighboring kingdoms to collect political and military information. The Persians knew more about their enemies than the enemies knew about them. In the times of the Persian Wars, Darius himself had sent scouts to Greece to study its coasts, ports, and resources. Centuries later, the same intelligence system would be imitated by the Romans and later by the Islamic empires. The care of the roads was a matter of state. Every year, inspectors reviewed their condition and organized repairs. In mountainous regions, Persian engineers built tunnels, suspension bridges, and passages carved into rock. In desert areas, they dug wells and qanats to ensure water supply. Travelers could cover long distances with relative comfort, something unprecedented in antiquity. The security of the routes encouraged cultural exchange. Greek philosophers, Babylonian sages, Egyptian doctors, and Indian astronomers traveled to the Persian courts, bringing knowledge that mixed and expanded. The army also depended on this infrastructure. The imperial roads allowed the rapid movement of troops and supplies. When a rebellion broke out in Egypt or an invasion in Thrace, messengers could notify Susa in a matter of days, and an army would already be marching before the enemies could regroup. The Persian reaction speed was one of the keys to their success in maintaining such an extensive empire for 2 centuries. The roads, however, were more than engineering. They were the visible symbol of imperial unity. In royal inscriptions, Darius claimed to have built the king's roads so that all the peoples of the world could travel under the protection of Ahura Mazda. In his vision, political order was a reflection of cosmic order. The roads were the veins of the world's body, and he was its heart. Internal decay, corruption, and rebellions. For more than a century, the Persian Empire had seemed indestructible. From the days of Cyrus to the triumphs of Darius and Xerxes, its borders had stretched like a cloak over the known world. However, the same order that had made it powerful began slowly to turn into an unbearable burden. The imperial machinery, once a symbol of efficiency and harmony, became rigid, corrupt, and slow. In the shadows of the great satrapies, the splendor crumbled and the echo of ancient victories faded amidst intrigues, rebellions, and decay. The process of decline began after the defeats in Greece. Although Xerxes returned with his army intact, the aura of Persian invincibility had disappeared. The immense wealth accumulated during the conquests began to dissolve into the luxury of the court and bureaucracy. In Susa and Persepolis, the palaces shone brighter than ever, but their foundations were fragile. Feasts and ceremonies multiplied, jewels and banquets replaced the spirit of discipline of the early kings. Zoroastrianism, which had given the empire its moral sense and balance, was reduced to a series of empty rituals. The satraps, once loyal servants of the monarch, began to behave like kings in their own provinces. The enormous distances between the center and the borders made direct control impossible. In Egypt, Lydia, Babylon, and Bactria, governors accumulated military power and personal treasures. The imperial routes continued to function, but the reports reaching the court were increasingly manipulated. The eyes and ears of the king, feared inspectors in the times of Darius, were now bribed or ignored. By the mid-5th century BCE, under the reign of Artaxerxes I, the empire faced its first major authority crisis. Egypt, traditionally difficult to control, rebelled with the support of Greek mercenaries. Although the revolt was suppressed, the cost was enormous. Persia had to accept the temporary loss of control over the Nile Delta and increase tributes in other provinces to finance the campaigns. The subjected peoples, aware of the weakness of the center, began testing the limits of their obedience. Simultaneously, corruption penetrated the highest layers of government. Administrative positions were bought and tax collection became a system of extortion. Peasants were forced to pay disproportionate tributes while nobles enriched themselves. The tablets found in Babylon show the deterioration of the food distribution system and the growing scarcity in rural areas. In some regions, subjects preferred to flee to the mountains or the desert rather than serve the king's collectors. The army, once the most disciplined force in the ancient world, began to fragment. Persian soldiers were replaced by contingents of foreign mercenaries, mainly Greeks, hired for their expertise. These warriors, loyal only to gold, came to represent a threat as great as external enemies. The cost of maintaining such extensive armies became unsustainable. The imperial coffers emptied, and wars were financed through increased tributes or devaluations of the Daric. Meanwhile, the spirit of unity that had characterized the early kings was fading. Dynastic marriages multiplied, and internal struggles for succession became common. After Xerxes' death, a series of conspiracies stained the court with blood. In 465 BC, Xerxes himself was murdered in his bedroom by his guard commander Artabanus, who tried to usurp the throne before being executed. His son Artaxerxes I inherited a throne weakened by distrust and intrigue. During the reigns of Artaxerxes I, Darius II, and Artaxerxes II, the empire remained standing but without vigor. Persia was still rich and powerful, but its greatness was only apparent. The economy was sustained through exploitation and trade, while conflicts with the Greeks continued, now on the diplomatic front. The satraps of Asia Minor began conspiring with Sparta or Athens according to their own interests. The Peloponnesian Wars in the 5th century BC were partially financed with Persian gold, distributed by satraps acting as independent kings. Discontent also grew among the empire's minorities. In Babylon, the local nobility dreamed of regaining their former independence. In Egypt, the priests resisted Persian control. In the north, Scythian peoples threatened the borders. Every rebellion required an army, and every army cost more gold than the empire could gather. Stability, which had been the essence of Persian order, became an illusion maintained by force. Culturally, Persia continued to shine. The arts, literature, and architecture reached extraordinary refinements. But that magnificence was also a symptom of decay. The kings built temples and palaces more for ostentation than for faith. The splendor of Persepolis contrasted with the poverty of the countryside and the misery of the most distant regions. The same empire that had unified the world under the idea of justice now rested on inequality. By the end of the 4th century BC, during the reign of Darius III, the empire retained its size but not its cohesion. Imperial roads remained open, but caravans traveled cautiously. The satrapies still sent tributes, but late. Messages took longer to arrive, and reports became uncertain. The administrative machinery functioned, but without a soul. Persia had become a shadow of itself. On the western frontiers, a new power was silently emerging: Macedonia. Under the command of a young king named Alexander, the Greek world began looking eastward again, not with fear, but with ambition. In the palaces of Susa, advisors warned of the danger, but the empire no longer had the energy to respond. The same routes that had carried Darius's messages and Xerxes' armies would soon be traveled by a new conqueror. When the first news of his advance reached the borders, few believed that such a vast kingdom could fall. But corruption, rebellions, and arrogance had done their work silently. Persia still seemed strong, but its greatness was hollow. And on the roads that once connected the world, the rumor of change was already approaching. The invasion of Alexander the Great, the end of the Achaemenid Empire. In 334 BC, a young king of barely 22 years crossed the Hellespont with an army of 30,000 men and an ambition that would change history. His name was Alexander of Macedonia. That crossing marked the beginning of a campaign that would put an end to the greatest empire of the ancient world, that of the Achaemenids. Persia, aged, corroded by corruption, and divided by the ambition of its satraps, would face the challenge of the West for the last time. The Persian throne was then occupied by Darius III, a man who had inherited an empire, not power. Although brave, he lacked the political genius of Cyrus or the organizational talent of Darius I. The satrapies acted independently. The armies were commanded by nobles more interested in their prestige than in victory, and the borders were maintained by inertia rather than conviction. Into that scenario came Alexander, determined to avenge the invasions of Xerxes and to fulfill a greater dream: to unite East and West under a single rule. The first confrontation took place on the plain of the Granicus River in Asia Minor. The local satraps gathered a large force to stop the invader, relying on numerical superiority and the tradition of their Persian cavalry. Alexander, at the head of his cavalry, crossed the river under enemy archers' fire and broke the Persian lines in a bold maneuver. The victory was swift and devastating. Sardis, the ancient capital of Lydia, fell without resistance, and the Greek cities of Asia Minor were freed from Persian control. In 333 BC, Darius III decided to face the Macedonian personally. He gathered a massive army, reinforced with war chariots and Greek mercenaries, and deployed it on the plains of Issus in southern Anatolia. The battle was a chaos of dust and blood. Darius, positioned in the center, hoped to crush Alexander with brute force, but the young general attacked directly the point where the king was. In the midst of combat, the Persian lines gave way. Darius fled the field, leaving behind his chariot, his family, and his prestige. That flight marked the beginning of the end. The Phoenician cities, deprived of imperial support, surrendered one by one. Only Tyre resisted for 7 months before being destroyed. Egypt, tired of Persian rule, welcomed Alexander as a liberator. In Memphis, he was crowned pharaoh and proclaimed son of Amun-Ra. There he founded Alexandria, the city that would symbolize the fusion of the cultures he dreamed of uniting. Meanwhile, Darius tried to reorganize his forces. In 331 BC, he gathered a new army at Gaugamela near Arbela, north of Babylon. It was Persia's last attempt to stop the invader. Chronicles speak of more than 200,000 men, accompanied by elephants and scythe chariots. Alexander had fewer than 50,000, but his discipline and strategy were superior. When the battle began, Darius ordered an advance, hoping to encircle the Macedonians. Alexander, with a perfect envelopment maneuver, attacked the right flank and opened a direct gap to the center. Once again, the Persian king fled. The consequences were immediate. Babylon surrendered without a fight, followed by Susa, where Alexander seized treasures accumulated over centuries. In Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the empire, he was received as a conqueror. During a banquet, according to the chroniclers, a Greek courtesan incited him to avenge the destruction of Athens by Xerxes. Alexander, drunk and exalted, ordered the city to be set on fire. The flames consumed Darius's palaces and the reliefs of the subjugated peoples. That night also burned the symbol of Persian glory. Darius III fled eastward, pursued by the Macedonian generals. He tried to gather forces in the regions of Bactria and Sogdiana, but was betrayed by one of his own satraps, Bessus, who captured him and ordered his execution. When Alexander found his body, he covered it with his own mantle and ordered a royal burial. With that gesture, he wanted to present himself not as a conqueror, but as the legitimate successor of the Persian kings. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire was rapid, but not accidental. The foundations were already rotten. The bureaucracy, once a model of efficiency, had become a web of intrigues. The satrapies into small autonomous kingdoms, the imperial routes into dry arteries. Persia had lost its soul long before losing its territory. Alexander did not destroy an empire at its peak, he simply toppled an exhausted colossus. Yet his conquest was not the end of Persian civilization, but its transformation. Persian administrators continued in their posts under the new rule. Customs, laws, and traditions survived, merging with Hellenistic culture. Alexander adopted Persian dress and customs, married his generals to Iranian women, and founded cities that would bear Greek names but Eastern hearts. In his brief reign, the young Macedonian carried the legacy of Persia to the edges of India, replicating its structures and universalist vision. The empire's roads continued to be traveled by merchants and soldiers, and the Persian and Aramaic languages continued to dominate the administration of the Eastern world. Even after his death, Alexander's successors, known as the Seleucids, would rule from the ancient Persian cities, preserving much of the Achaemenid apparatus. Thus ended the era of Persian kings. The sacred fire still burned in the Zoroastrian temples, but the throne of the Achaemenids had vanished. In the blackened ruins of Persepolis, the columns that once held the Apadana rose like ghosts against the sky. There, among the fragments of stone and the silence of centuries, the echo of Cyrus the Great still seemed to murmur, "I founded the empire of the Persians and ruled all humanity." But there were no Persians left to rule the world, nor kings to speak with the gods. Only the memory of a civilization that for 200 years had united under the same sun, peoples, languages, and beliefs. The world Alexander inherited from Persia would be different but never new. For although the empire fell to the sword, its spirit survived in every city, every road, and every idea of order that man has imagined since then.